What if the most important target in the entire 3-night campaign against Iran is the one the Pentagon refuses to show you? In the released strike footage, almost everything is visible. Radar sites erupt. Missile storage facilities burn. Communications towers disappear into smoke. Fast-attack boats and drone-launch vehicles are destroyed. One specific strike has been deliberately obscured. One frame, one target, blurred before the video was released. That is not necessarily evidence of a secret weapon or a hidden nuclear facility. It could mean the image exposed an intelligence source, a targeting method, or a capability Washington does not want Iran to understand. But whatever the reason, the blur creates a strategic mystery. Because if the most revealing target is the one the audience cannot see, then the real story may not be what the United States has already destroyed. It may be what those strikes have now made possible. And that brings us to the hero of this story. Not a fighter jet. Not even the carrier strike group. The hero is the Strait of Hormuz. A narrow waterway that appears almost insignificant on a world map. But move the camera closer. On satellite imagery, it is a thin corridor of blue connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Tankers move through it in both directions. Oil moves through pipelines and ports. Around them, radar stations watch from the coastline. Fast boats wait for opportunities. Missiles sit inside concealed launch positions. And mines can remain underwater long after the aircraft that deployed them have disappeared. The Strait is not merely geography. And for Iran, that leverage has always depended on one assumption: that the threat of closing the Strait would create more economic pain for everyone else than military pain for Iran. That calculation is now being tested. The crisis began with a diplomatic promise that should have been almost impossible to misunderstand. Iran agreed to make its best efforts to ensure safe passage for commercial vessels through the Strait for 60 days. Not permanent disarmament. Not surrender. Not the end of Iran's regional ambitions. Just safe passage for a military organization built around asymmetric pressure. That should have been a manageable commitment. The IRGC attacked the GFS Galaxy, a Cyprus-flagged container ship. Engine room fire disabled the vessel. The crew was forced to abandon ship. One crew member remained missing. Then came the declaration. Iran said the strait was closed. The explanation was that the vessel had been traveling along an unauthorized route. A government can declare a maritime corridor closed. That does not mean the ocean suddenly accepts the declaration. The strait does not change because someone posts a statement. Ships still have to move. Oil still has to flow. And military power still has to enforce the claim. The IRGC then fired a warning shot at another vessel and announced that foreign ships would have to be identified, tracked, and monitored before passing. The message was clear. Iran believed it could define the rules of the strait. But Washington was about to answer a different question. Not whether Iran had violated the agreement, but whether the military infrastructure supporting that violation could survive. And that is where the campaign changed character. Because the United States did not respond by trying to destroy everything at once. It moved in sequence. Night 1. Approximately 80 targets. The first targets were the eyes and nerves of the Iranian coastal system. Radar installations, communications nodes, fast-attack boat infrastructure. These were not necessarily the most spectacular targets. They were the targets that made everything else possible. A radar site and detect a ship. A launch platform can turn information into action. Remove one, and the network becomes weaker. Remove all three, and the network begins losing its ability to function as a network. The lesson here is simple. A military system is often more vulnerable as a system than as a collection of individual weapons. And that created the first strategic contradiction. Iran could still possess missiles. It could still possess boats. It could still possess drones. But if its sensors could no longer see reliably, and its communications could no longer coordinate reliably, those weapons became increasingly isolated. Night 1 was therefore not the end of the campaign. It was the preparation for the next one. Then came Night 2. Approximately 90 positions. Now the target set expanded. Naval capabilities. Ammunition storage. The deeper layers of the coastal defense architecture. Look at the sequence from above. The first night attacks the eyes. The second begins attacking the hands. And suddenly the logic becomes visible. The United States was not simply destroying targets. It was changing the conditions under which future targets could be destroyed. But here's the problem. Every successful strike creates a new question. If the Iranian air-minus defense network is degraded, what happens to dispersed launch sites? What happens to the IRGC's ability to threaten commercial traffic? The answer arrived on Night 3. 140 targets. Missile and drone launch sites. Naval capabilities. Ammunition storage. Communications networks. Coastal surveillance. The entire architecture was being attacked at once. Imagine the scene from above. Along hundreds of miles of coastline, radar screens begin going dark. Communications links disappear. Fuel and ammunition facilities burn. Launch positions are struck. And, somewhere offshore, commercial ships continue moving. This is the contradiction at the center of the campaign. Iran declared that the Strait was closed. Yet hundreds of commercial vessels continued to transit. More than 300 Iranian military positions were reportedly struck across the 3-night campaign. And still, the Strait remained open enough for global commerce to continue. The balance of control had. One facility reveals why. J-Ask. On a satellite image, J-Ask looks like another military installation along Iran's coastline. But zoom in. Communications infrastructure. Electronic surveillance. J-Ask is important because it does not need to fire a missile to influence the battlefield. It needs to see. The weapon is often not the missile. The weapon is the information that tells someone where to fire it. Destroy the sensor, and the missile may still exist. But the chain connecting detection to decision to launch begins to fracture. And the same logic applies to communications. A coastal radar can see a ship. But someone has to tell another unit what the radar sees. Someone has to coordinate the response. Someone has to decide which target matters. The moment that chain breaks, a centralized military system begins behaving like disconnected islands. That is why the campaign sequencing matters. Night 1 created the conditions for Night 2. Night 2 created the conditions for Night 3. And Night 3 attacked the network as a whole. But another contradiction was already emerging. The United States could destroy fixed infrastructure. It could strike launch sites. It could suppress radar. But it could not simply bomb the ocean. Because the Strait's most dangerous weapon might not be sitting on the coast at all. It might already be underwater. A mine does not need a radar. It does not need a communications relay. It does not need a command center. That changes the calculation completely. 300 targets can be destroyed from the air. But an underwater mine still has to be found and cleared. And mine clearing is slow. It requires specialized ships. It requires time. And potentially, it requires operating inside a battlespace where the enemy still possesses surviving coastal weapons. So the campaign has achieved something remarkable. But it has not solved everything. That does not mean it is safe. And that distinction may become critical in the next phase. Because the United States has now demonstrated that it can attack the infrastructure supporting Iran's maritime pressure. The next question is whether Iran can adapt faster than that infrastructure is destroyed. That is where the blurred frame becomes important again. Because the visible targets tell us what the campaign has already accomplished. The invisible target may tell us what comes next. And perhaps the most important clue is not the target itself. The strike appears in the broadest package of the 3 nights, after 2 nights of degradation, after ride-on networks were weakened, after the defensive architecture had been pressured. Whatever that blurred target represented, it was reached under conditions that may not have existed at the beginning of the campaign. That creates the central mystery. Was the target hidden because it revealed how American intelligence found it, or because its destruction revealed a new phase of the war? Because there is a difference between destroying an enemy's weapons and destroying the system that allows the enemy to understand where you are. And that difference is about to become much more important. The Strait of Hormuz is still there. The ships are still moving. The oil is still flowing. But beneath the visible campaign, another battle is beginning. A battle over information. A battle over logistics. A battle over how long each side can continue making decisions under pressure. And that is where the story stops being about 3 nights of airstrikes. Because everyone is watching the missiles. Everyone is counting the targets. Everyone is looking at the smoke. But the real war may be happening somewhere else entirely. Everyone thinks this battle is about missiles and ships. But the real battle is about something more difficult to destroy. A system. The Strait of Hormuz is not controlled by whoever has the most weapons. It is controlled by whoever can maintain the chain connecting detection, decision, movement, and resupply. Break that chain in enough places, and an army can still possess thousands of weapons while losing the ability to use them effectively. That is the deeper meaning of the 3-night campaign. It was trying to make the Iranian military architecture progressively less capable of functioning as a coherent system. And that changes everything. Because once the battlefield moves from individual weapons to the system behind them, the question is no longer, how many missiles does Iran have? How many missiles can Iran still find targets for, coordinate, and replace? That is a much harder question. And it leads directly to the midpoint transformation of this story. Everyone thinks the battle is about keeping the strait open. But the real battle is about controlling the cost of closing it. Iran's strategy has always depended on creating uncertainty. The ship slows down. If energy traders believe oil supplies might be interrupted, prices move before a single barrel disappears. The missile does not have to hit. The possibility of the missile can be enough. That is the invisible battlefield. Psychology. Economics. And the United States is now trying to reverse that equation. American military power is attempting to make Iranian threats increasingly expensive for Iran itself. That is why the target sequence matters. Communications, launch sites, ammunition, naval infrastructure. Each strike removes one piece of the mechanism that converts Iranian political decisions into physical danger. But there is a problem. The IRGC does not need a perfect system. It only needs enough surviving capability to create uncertainty. A small number of fast boats can still move. A surviving cruise missile battery can still threaten shipping. A mine can remain underwater. A mobile launcher can relocate. And a single surviving communications link can sometimes be enough to coordinate an attack. This is why modern warfare rarely ends when the target list becomes impressive. The enemy's remaining capability matters more than the number already destroyed. And this is where technology begins to change the equation. Consider the weapons being used against the remaining Iranian threat. An F-16 carrying advanced precision kill weapon system rockets tells a story. These weapons are not designed for the largest fixed targets. They are designed for smaller, mobile threats. Launch platforms. The things that survive after the large infrastructure has been damaged. The battlefield is shrinking, but it is also becoming harder. Because fixed targets are predictable, mobile targets are not. And the same logic appears in precision-guided bombs, such as the GBU-54. A weapon that can continue toward its last known target location, even if laser designation is interrupted, gives pilots more flexibility inside a contested environment. The aircraft does not have to remain perfectly exposed until impact. That matters because degraded air defenses are not the same thing as destroyed air defenses. And this is another contradiction. The more successful the campaign becomes, the more difficult the remaining targets may become. The easy targets disappear first. What remains is mobile, dispersed, camouflaged, and sometimes underground. That brings us back to the blurred frame. Because the most interesting target may not be the one that created the largest explosion. It may be the one that represented the next level of the campaign. Perhaps an intelligence collection site. Perhaps a mobile capability. Perhaps something whose destruction revealed too much about how American intelligence had found it. The important point is not knowing exactly what the blur contains. Information itself has become part of the battlespace. And that connects this campaign to a much larger transformation in modern warfare. Look at the cameras. Not satellites. Not spy planes. Cameras. Consumer devices. Security systems. Internet-connected equipment. In another theater, intelligence services have demonstrated how seemingly ordinary civilian devices can become surveillance tools when they are connected to the internet and poorly secured. A camera outside a house can observe military movement. A factory security system can reveal logistics. A device installed for convenience can become a sensor for an intelligence network. The strategic lesson is uncomfortable. The battlefield no longer begins at the front line. It begins wherever information exists. That means the same principle applies to Iran. A military campaign built around precision strikes depends on intelligence. And intelligence depends on sensors. Some are military. Some are commercial. Some are hidden. Some may be sitting in places nobody thinks of as part of the battlefield. Which means the most valuable weapon in the campaign may not be the bomb. It may be the information that tells the bomb where to go. And now we can understand why the Strait is so important. Because the Strait is a physical bottleneck sitting on top of a digital and economic battlefield. A radar operator watches a ship. A satellite tracks movement. A commander approves a strike. A tanker continues sailing thousands of miles away. An oil trader watches the price. All of these events are connected. Break one part, and the consequences move through the system. This is where military power becomes economic power. Oil continues moving. If oil continues moving, markets receive a signal. That means the United States does not necessarily have to destroy every Iranian missile. It only has to prevent those missiles from creating the strategic effect here unintended. But Iran has one weapon that airstrikes cannot easily eliminate. The finite magazine problem. Every missile launched is a missile that cannot be launched again. Every drone destroyed is an aircraft that must eventually be replaced. Every ammunition depot destroyed removes inventory. Every damaged port complicates resupply. Every disrupted rail corridor creates another obstacle. And this is where the military battlefield collides with geography and economics. Iran's military power is not produced by rhetoric. It is produced by factories. Factories require electricity. They require components. Components require supply chains. Supply chains require transportation. Transportation requires functioning infrastructure. And all of it requires money. A missile fired from the coastline may look like an isolated military event. But behind that missile is an industrial system. That system is the real target of long wars. Can Iran replace what it is losing faster than the United States can destroy it? The campaign becomes a long war of adaptation. If the answer is no, every night of strikes becomes more consequential. But neither conclusion is guaranteed. Iran can disperse. It can use deception. It can rely on smaller weapons. It can shift from centralized infrastructure toward mobile systems. And the United States must adapt in response. This is why the campaign should not be measured only by the number of targets destroyed. The real measurement is the changing relationship between capability and cost. How much does it cost Iran to threaten one ship? How much does it cost the United States to protect that ship? How many aircraft must be launched? How many interceptors must be fired? How many mines remain? How many mobile launchers survive? And how long can each side sustain the exchange? That is the strategic balance. And it brings us to another major piece of the architecture. At first glance, the USS Abraham Lincoln is simply a floating airfield. But strategically, a fixed airbase has coordinates. A carrier does not. Today, the carrier is somewhere in the Arabian Sea. It is somewhere else. The carrier can move. The escorts can launch cruise missiles. The entire formation can reposition before the enemy's targeting cycle catches up. That creates a difficult problem for Iran. To attack a fixed base, you need to know where it is. To attack a moving carrier, you need to know where it will be. That difference is enormous. And it explains how a campaign can continue night after night without depending entirely on vulnerable fixed infrastructure. But the Strait cannot be separated from the wider regional battlefield. Iran does not operate in isolation. Its strategic network has historically depended on partners and proxies across Iraq and Yemen. Those networks create additional pressure points. They allow Tehran to threaten American interests indirectly. They complicate attribution. They force Washington to divide attention. But when those networks are degraded, Iran loses options. And this creates another contradiction. The more direct Iran's attacks become, the more constrained its strategic choices may actually be. Direct missile launches are easier to attribute. Direct attacks on commercial shipping create clearer justification for retaliation. Proxy operations create ambiguity. Direct operations remove it. The Strait therefore represents more than a geographic battlefield. It is becoming a test of whether Iran can maintain strategic leverage after its alternative pressure mechanisms have been reduced. Whatever was hidden in that footage, it exists inside a campaign that is gradually moving from visible destruction toward invisible pressure. The first phase destroyed infrastructure. The next phase may be about intelligence, mobile systems, mines, industrial capacity, and political endurance. It is a transition. The question is no longer whether the United States can strike Iranian military positions. It has demonstrated that capability. The real question is whether those strikes can change Iran's strategic calculation before Iran adapts its own. Because every advantage creates a new vulnerability. American precision creates dependence on intelligence. Iranian missile inventories create dependence on resupply. The Strait creates leverage for Iran. But that leverage also creates a predictable target for American military power. And the more Iran relies on a single geographic choke point, the more pressure can be concentrated against it. This is the paradox of the Strait of Hormuz. It is powerful precisely because it is narrow, and vulnerable for exactly the same reason. So the blurred frame remains. A single hidden target. A single missing piece. Perhaps it contains the clue to the next phase. Perhaps it is simply an intelligence precaution. But its existence tells us something important. Modern warfare is no longer only about what an enemy can destroy. It is about what an enemy can still understand. What it can still see. What it can still coordinate. And what it still believes it can threaten. Iran declared the Strait closed. Commercial vessels continued moving. The United States attacked the infrastructure behind the declaration. But the Strait is not yet a solved problem. Mines remain. Mobile weapons remain. Uncertainty remains. and the strategic contest is still evolving. The question is no longer whether Iran possesses enough weapons to threaten the Strait. The real question is whether Iran can preserve enough of the system behind those weapons to make that threat strategically meaningful. And that is the question the next phase of this conflict will answer. Do you believe future wars will be decided by who destroys the most weapons or by who destroys the enemy's ability to see, coordinate, and replace them first?